You're listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, the show with a light-hearted look at the eventing world, all of the big event previews, reviews, and special guests, and of course, backed up with all of the key Echo Rating stats. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. And listeners, we have got a really, really exciting show lined up for you. This is one that has been on our radar for a little while. He is the reigning Pan American Games gold medalist. He has been a stalwart of the US team for the last 10 years or so. Welcome to the show, Boyd Martin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Let's go back to the beginning, because you've had such an extraordinary career, and I mean, there's so much more still to come. But talk me through your childhood, because your parents actually met at the Winter Olympics. Is that right?
Yeah, my mum's American. Was born in America. She's from the Midwest over here in Illinois, and she was a speed skater for America. And my dad was from Australia, and he was a cross country skier. So I think he skied in the 30 or 50 kilometre Nordic ski race at the Grenoble Olympics in '68. My mum was, I think, 3,000 metres speed skater. So they met there, and then she followed him home to Australia. So that's sort of how my family line got started on the other side of the world.
Amazing. So how did the love of horses and the love of eventing come into it?
Well, I'd say growing up, sport was a very, very big part of our family, and sport's actually a really big part of everyone in Australia, even more so than what I've seen here in America. And, as kids growing up, we were encouraged to take on all sports, and we sort of lived on the outskirts of Sydney, and so we did everything. We were on the beach, surf lifesaving, we were running, soccer, cricket, football, rugby, and we had 3 acres. And we decided to join the pony club and had a couple of horses in the background and in the backyard, And every Sunday I used to jump on a little pony and ride an hour or so up to pony club and got into equestrian sports like that. So, for me it was a great sort of upbringing, because I wasn't really good at school, or I couldn't really sit still or concentrate, and sort of when I decided to pursue a sport for a career, my parents were right behind it, where most parents would sort of freak out at their kid deciding to chase a career in training animals.
And were you ever tempted by another sport? Obviously a really sporty upbringing. Was there ever a competitor for eventing?
I got to say, growing up, I was a very, very good runner. I won the Australian schoolboys 1,500 metre when I was about 17 or 18, which was a big deal. So, but, for as far as a career goes, I think, if I was a runner or a football player or any other athletic sport, I'd be all washed up now. I'd be finished. And, by the time you're 40 or so, you're pretty much you're used up in other athletic sports. And with the great thing with horses is, if you can look after your body, you just you can keep going and going and going. So I feel like I'm only sort of halfway through my career. And I suppose the great thing with horses is it's obviously what drew me to it was the sport and the competitions, but you can, really make a great career out of it, especially here in America. It's, if you're a real worker and you're a hustler, you can make a really good, life for yourself and a good business as well. So it sort of was a great decision to go for the horses.
It certainly paid dividends. And when you were growing up, I know you went through Pony Club, and then there was obviously the Young Rider system in Australia. Talk to me a little bit about going to be based with Heath Ryan, because that was a big part of your sort of, I guess, the early days of your career, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a big turning point in my life, to be quite frank. Like, let's see, through the end of high school, I was a wild man. I was staying out all night and living pretty fast, and still loving my sport and working hard, but it was potentially a disaster. And at the age of 17, my mum and dad sent me up to the New South Wales Equestrian Centre, and I did the working student program there at Heath Ryan's and Rosie Ryan's. And I got to say, that was a great turning point in my life, just to have a mentor and a trainer and a legend like Heath, that really could embrace these young riders, these kids, and taught you how to work really hard, how to train horses, how to break horses in. He's a Grand Prix dressage, 3-day eventing, and he is such a wonderful guy that's high energy, and I was quite drawn to him. So to me, that was, looking back on it, I often wondered where I'd end up if I didn't end up being a working student at Heath's farm up there in Lochinvar. And I met great friends there who was like guys like Jock Paget and Kevin McNabb and Chris Burton. Sort of we're all similar ages, all ended up there, up in that area, and it was just great. It was hard work and horses, and it's where the fire really got lit, I think.
I'm not surprised. I mean, some of the names that you mentioned there, it was a real, I'm going to say, a breeding ground for future superstar event riders. What about moving over to the US? Because you went over in 2007. Obviously, you'd got dual citizenship anyway. Am I right in thinking that you were already, you moved over with Silver, your now wife, at that point?
Well, let's see. I wanted to, I did every 3-star and 4-star in Australia and New Zealand, and then I decided there was more out there. So I put a young horse called Yin Yang Yo on a cargo plane, and I come to America with him on the cargo plane and did Kentucky 3-day event. And I based here with Philip Dutton just in the weeks leading up to it, and loved it here. And then sort of went back to Australia, got married to Silver, at the same time decided that America was the place to be, and sort of spent 6 months sort of selling horses, selling all the refrigerator, got rid of our apartment, and got married, and then moved back to America permanently. And to be honest, America, I had an American passport because of my mum, so most of the Australian guys, they went to England, and I decided to give America a crack just with the fact that I had an American passport, and it'd be a little bit easier to sort of start working, get going here. And it was a great decision. It was coming to America is a fantastic country, especially for eventing, and I really, really think that, again, that was a major turning point in my life.
And when you went over to America, you went back to Phillips and worked there alongside him for a couple of years before setting up on your own. What was that like? So he's been a bit of a mentor to you throughout your life in that respect. He's done the trip from Australia over to America and set up a very, very good life for himself there. I imagine that played a big part in sort of shaping your future career in the States.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'd been sort of 8 years at Heath Ryan's farm, and Heath was yelling and screaming and shouting and pushing himself, and really eccentric character, great guy. And then moving to Phillips, and I worked for Philip for I think 2 or 3 years, and he's the opposite. He was dead quiet, very organised, and wouldn't say much all day, but and equally as fantastic horseman and trainer, and again turning into a great mentor for me. And I learned a lot from him. I think I rode for him for about 3 years as just working for him and learning everything. I mean, he's a fantastic top competitor. I mean, great businessman. Really showed me the art of picking horses and getting owners, and again, hard worker, driven, and ultimately turned into one of my best friends. And again, very, very lucky. A bit like landing at Heath's, just that the person that I ended up sort of working underneath ended up just being a top class, top caliber person that really showed me the way to go.
And has been such an impact as well, and was actually alongside you when you made your first senior championship appearance for the US team in 2010 in Kentucky. How was that? Because you'd been longlisted for Australia for, I think, 3 Olympic Games by this point. How was that sort of first championship on what was now home soil?
That was great. I mean, I'd worked so hard in all my years and sort of dreamed in Australia of representing Australia, and and I was just, to be honest, I was a bit too green. I was a little bit inexperienced. I had a couple of good horses, but again, they were injured at the wrong time, or I didn't perform at the right moment. And finally, I feel like I was a little bit more mature over here in America, and a bit more seasoned, and changed my nationality to become American. And again, I mean, I was just almost had my hand held, through the whole process of going well at Kentucky, then getting selected, then training for the WEG at Kentucky, and again having that mentor on the team, Philip, to sort of guide me and show me the ropes. It was a surreal experience, and it was a great going to Kentucky in 2010 and seeing a couple of the guys that I grew up with in Australia. Birdo was riding for Australia. Jock Pageant somehow was riding from New Zealand, and I was riding for America. It was crazy to think, a couple of years ago we were all drinking a beer down at Lochinvar Hotel together. It was a weird experience.
I bet Heath Ryan was a very proud man after those Kentucky games. Neville Bardot was the horse that you rode. You finished inside the top 10 individually. The team just missed out on a team medal and finished in 4th place. But he actually was a horse then that played a huge part of your journey in 2011. And I think actually at some point, listeners, we will have to do a Horse Heroes on him, because his career has just been extraordinary. But 2011 was a really, really tough year for you. And it all, I suppose, it was well documented at the time, and listeners, many of you might be aware of it, but actually a fire at your barn, I suppose, changed everything. Talk us through that, because it is your worst nightmare, and it came true for you.
Yeah, it was a disaster. It was just, 2010 was the WEG, and I'd started working for myself about that time and renting a big barn, and, slowly getting clients in, and people were sending you horses, and I really felt like everything was just starting to get going. And then there was an electrical fire in the middle of the night and burned this whole building. It was a massive building. Let's say there's like 6 horses burnt to death, and then 4 or 5 others were in intensive care, and it was just a nightmare. And to have a horrible moment like that it sort of happened early in your career was a little bit of a tough thing to come your way. But it was, there was, I don't know, I think I was raised in Australia where you just sort of get on with it, and there was a lot of people saying, "Oh, how did you get through it?" And you just put your head down and keep waking up every day and keep chipping along. And America's a great country where had lots of people sort of help us out, and before we knew it, we were sort of back in business. So in hindsight, it was a good test, but it was it was a challenge and a test. And part of I suppose your self-belief is that no matter what you get faced with here on out, if you can sort of get through a moment like that, anything else should be smooth sailing.
Should be possible. It didn't. I mean, I guess the months that followed were tough as well in their own right. I know you lost your father-in-law as well, and the hit sort of kept on coming. But the light at the end of that sort of tunnel was, I guess, Burghley, because Neville Bardot had been one of those horses that had been pulled from the fire by yourself and Philip, had been in intensive care, and then made the journey back to 5-star. That must have felt incredibly special after everything you've been through.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, Burghley was an event that I'd always dreamed of competing at, and Neville was an absolute sort of Burghley horse. Like, he was a hot, fiery thoroughbred from Australia that could gallop for days, and it was just a day by day process where first of all we were just trying to save his life and see if he could live out his days. And then, the next step was, well, hang on, we can start riding him again. And then next thing, he's jumping him and galloping him. And then he was already pretty fit before the fire. And, it was just a day by day process to try and get the horse to the event. And to the horse's credit, man, he went fantastic around Burleigh that year. It was a tough, biggest course I'd ever ridden, and the horse was fantastic. And I think he finished like 7th or something like that. And yeah, great accomplishment. And again, just one of those moments where you're right, even though everything's going wrong, I can still achieve what I set out to do.
Yeah, absolutely. He did finish 7th. And I guess when you look at the fire being at the end of May and the heartbreak and the uncertainty to coming back at the beginning of September for a top 10 finish, having travelled all the way over to England to do one of the biggest 5-stars is just extraordinary. Can I ask you about your family life a little bit? Because your wife, Silver, we've already mentioned her. She competes internationally pure dressage as well. How has her impact been in terms of creating a career and a life and a yard and a family in the States for you?
Married well, to be quite frank. I think maybe, it's marrying a dressage rider for any of you eventing guys out there listening. It's a good career move. So, and beyond that, she's obviously a great girl and great mum. And I don't think any normal woman would put up with my life, to be quite frank with you, Nicole, like in the sense of, you're working 7 days a week. We never have too much spare money because we're spending them all on horses. We never really go on vacation because we're away competing too much. Like what normal woman would sort of would put up with that? So picking a lady from the equestrian sports was sort of one of the keys. And Silver's obviously had a massive impact on my riding of being, riding in the ring every day with Grand Prix horses, and a lady that sort of has been trained by some of the best dressage trainers in Germany, and then having that influence your dressage riding. Great. And then we bought this farm in Pennsylvania, and having 2 kids grow up on the farm, I mean, it's a dream come true. It's a real ideal setup. Now she is very strict and very tough on me. And, I just got to take that. She's a very clean person as well. Like, our house looks like a hospital. But so there's a couple of, you just got to sort of roll with the punches out there. And but it's handy. The Australian event rider marrying the German dressage queen. So, it's chalk and cheese.
She's got to keep you in line, Boyd.
She tries to.
It's been an extraordinary journey to this point, and I've absolutely no doubt there's going to be lots in store for both of you in the future. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about the number of horses and in terms of the horses that you compete, because actually you are one of the busiest riders in US eventing. In fact, I've got a fun fact for you. So in terms of riders that have had, I haven't told you this either, so it might be a surprise, who knows. Since 2014, there have been less than 30 times since a rider has had more than 100 runs in a season in terms of USEA runs. So this is national runs. And you appear inside the top 10, a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 times, and you hold the equal highest number of runs in a season as well, with 178. You're extraordinarily busy. And that kind of leads me on to the question that I wanted to ask you, because you had a real sort of peak in terms of horses that you were riding at international level, I guess around sort of 2016, 17, 18, when you had over 50 international runs each season. That dropped slightly in 2019 to 29. Has that been a conscious decision in terms of the number of horses that you're riding and competing at top level?
Yeah, it's a combination of a few things. I mean, when you're starting your business, you take on all comers. If that phone rings and someone's got a horse down the street that bucks and rears and they want you to sort it out, you bring it over. And if the old lady down the road wants to see if you can take their fox hunter around a horse trial, you'll give that a crack. And so as time goes on, you sort of start streamlining those ones out of the way a bit. And to be honest, in 2019, I thought, to get a bit better, I've got to start sort of doing less horses but better quality. And to be quite honest, about 2018 onwards, I started getting hurt a fair bit. Like my, I've had a number of surgeries, and my body's starting to give up a bit. So I realised that I remember when I was working for Phillip, I rode 18 horses at one event on a Saturday, Sunday at a 3-day event. So I could never do that now. And, so I think to get better is, I don't want to get remembered in America as the guy that rode the most horses. I got to try and get some of these top horses and try and start winning some of these big 5-stars. So it's a change where, quality over quantity is one thing. And secondly, I think the longevity of my career to try and keep going to my goal of competing at the 5-star level till I'm 70 is, your body can't take the punishment and abuse that it once used to take. So it's sort of a few things all wrapped into one.
Well, I've got another fun fact for you, because that absolutely makes sense. You will be delighted to know that it is paying off, because in 2019 and 2020, you had 2 of your most successful seasons, even with fewer horses running. And 2 of your top 3 number of international victories came in those 2 years. And you broke your average dressage score into the 20s from all of your international runs last year for the very first time in your career. So that's quite cool. 29.2, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think the judges got a bit easier, with the COVID they all started to relax a bit. And I also had 4 surgeries last year, so that was the other reason I slowed down and got my wife to ride all the horses, and I just jumped off the show. So.
Silver was schooling them at home, or whatever it was, it absolutely worked. Talk to me a little bit about the surgeries and sort of coming back for 2021, because you did have a good deal of surgery last year, but a little bit of that was actually planned, wasn't it, in terms of good timing? Things were a bit quieter with COVID, actually to give yourself the chance to fully recover heading into what we hope will be Tokyo 2021.
Yeah, let's see, in 2019, I broke my pelvis and then tore my groin, and then that had to get repaired. And then I had hip surgery as soon as the plague came, and had some arthritis and bone spurs and labrum tears cleaned up. And then I got hurt again last year, and then I had one more sort of option surgery at the end of last year, a bit like a horse get a bit of work done in the off season. So, I just accept that I don't mind it too much. There's it's frustrating and depressing when you get hurt, because you sort of feel like the world's passing you by. But, I think it's just part of the game where athletes riding horses at high speeds, at fixed obstacles, and sooner or later it goes wrong. And, if you think about it, last 20, 25 years, I've been just every day, riding 10 or 15 horses and jump after jump and fall after fall. And I think I'm sure I'm going to be crippled as hell when I'm older, and I'm quite fine with that idea. And I really just want to make the most of my riding career where I got that window here for the next 10 years or so where I could really, really have a good crack at this.
What about that future then? So obviously you've been to Olympic Games, you've done World Equestrian Games, Pan American Games, gold medals. What next? What is the sort of items on your tick list that you would really like to check off?
Well, 2 things. I think being in America, I think we have the real chance, more so than the guys in England, to financially set ourselves up for the rest of our lives, and I think the sport here is very, very lucrative in the sense that there is money to be made out there, and there's, and I think being in America, I'm sure I know it's way more competitive in England, and I know I'd probably be a better rider just because I'd be around better riders than me all the time. But here in America, I think we can really change the rest of our life, of making sure that we can put some money away and invest in property and, try and make the most of our career financially. And then part 2 of the question is, I've done it all in the sense of I've been a participant at the Olympics and a participant at the WEG and yeah, I haven't actually won an individual medal, or I mean, I won a 5-star years and years ago back in Australia, but I finished second, third, fourth at these big ones, at Kentucky and Lemoulin, and I've just missed out here and there. So I think that I'm close, but I haven't nailed it yet, and I look at riders like Timmy Price and Janelle and Birdo that they're still just a notch ahead of me, as far as riders and competitors, and so I've still got a little bit of ground to make up and get a little bit better, chase some better horses, and really try and think that it would be good to try and go to these championships with the idea of I'm not just going to be a member of the team. I want to get in there and try and get up in the top placings or win it,
Yeah, absolutely. And one horse in your string now who has taken you very, very close to one of those big victories with a runner-up position at Kentucky back in 2019 is Setsaleg. The plan being for him very much, I imagine, is Tokyo this summer. And hopefully, dare I ask, we're recording this, listeners, at a time when the fundraising for Kentucky is happening. So we're not sure whether it will be going ahead or not. But I guess a 5-star in the spring would have been the aim as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too Olympic focused in the sense of, I remember when Neville Bardos in 2011 did really good, and then we sort of saved him and weighted him and protected him, and then all of a sudden when you really need them, they're a bit rusty. So I think for me, I learned a lesson there that when the horses are fit and sound and in form is to try and pick out these marquee events, these big Kentucky 3-day events or Badmingtons or Lemoulins, and try and win them, and after that, if the horses come through it healthy and sound and there's a Olympics or a WEG around the corner, go for that, but to not sort of shape their whole career about having them ready for that one event. Because, I've got a luxury. I've got 4 or 5 horses at that top level now. So if one gets injured or goes down, there's a replacement one there. But you just got to be a little bit careful about just trying to get selected or picked on the team, because you train them in a different way and you compete them in a different way, and you can miss out on some big results. To answer your question, I think Thomas, we call him. He's a great horse. Touch wood, he's been a really sound horse, and we'll just see what happens. Hopefully, at Kentucky runs, and then maybe I'll take some of the other ones over to Badminton or something like that. So we'll just see how it all unfolds. It's a bit of a weird time in the sense we're not quite sure what's around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a huge amount of sense, and it's something that I'm sure riders have different ways of looking at it, but Sam's certainly talked about it on this podcast before of, focus on what you can do right in front of you, because if you protect them too much, actually all of your eggs are in one basket and that basket may not come off. Will there be a chance that we could potentially see Thomas Setsaleg over in the UK at either Badminton or Burghley in the future?
Yeah, I'd love to do that, both those ones on him. I think he'd be, if the Olympics doesn't happen, I'd try and get him to Burghley. I think he could. He's got one of those. He's one of those horses that's really good at every phase. He doesn't have a weak phase. He's a great galloper, good jumper, good on the flat, tough, resilient horse. Doesn't matter the conditions. So it would be good to come to England and rendezvous with a few of the old sparring partners with Thomas, because I think he could actually shake. So it's. We got that on our radar, and we'll just see how. I think we're in for a bit of a wonky year again here in 2021, but I think Thomas's career could go on for a bit further along. So I've got them lined up over there.
Big plans. Good. That's what we like to hear. And if we do get you over here for a Badminton or a Burghley, and we've got Chris Burton and everybody else there, we might have to do a reunion podcast, because that would be a lot of fun.
A lot of great stories that no one knows about those guys. So
I was going to say there would be all sorts you could tell us. if any of our listeners are sort of looking to keep following a horse in your yard over the next few years that you think is a future star that either has been stepped up to international level or is a young horse, that who would you sort of say keep your eye on that one? Because I think a lot of them.
I've got a younger horse called Luke 140, and he's by Landos, which is the same sire of London 52, and he's just gone advanced now. He won the Galway 4-star long in California last November. He's about 15 hands high, and he's a rocket. He's really good on the flat. He jumps like a bunny rabbit. And again, I think he's probably the horse that has got the most quality that I've ever had. And again, he's a bit of a wild man. He's sharp, and he's thrown me off a few times, but he's a real fighter. He's a great jumper, can do a very, very good dressage test, and I think that potentially could be a great horse coming through. But you know, I got a bunch of up and coming horses, and I'm still very much enjoying the process and enjoying the bringing the horses along. Going, we went yesterday. We're in this rinky dink competition down here in Aiken, and it's to me, I'm still loving it, and it's a great way to and I can't even call it a job. It's flying around the world with horses and competing and championship events. It's I've done well. I'm very, very grateful and proud of where I've ended up.
And I'm sure there is so much more still to come. But enjoy it. Boyd, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk to us. It has been really fascinating to go back and kind of relive some of the highlights of your career and look forward to where we can see you next. But thank you very much for coming on the show.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege and honour talking to you and all the listeners out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Boyd. Listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this very, very special episode of the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. Do stay tuned and we will be back with more very shortly. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast. This podcast is available for free on iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, or wherever you usually listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Find us at eventingpodcast.com or search Eventing Podcast on social media.